Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the Board of Regents meeting. We're going to start with agenda item 5D under Academic and Student Affairs, the Diversity Center's presentation. I will turn it over to Janelle Toman. I'd like to welcome all the panelists. I know that Janelle will introduce yourselves, but we look forward to your presentation, so thank you all for being here.
Good morning, members of the board and Chair Bastian. Appreciate the opportunity. For the record, my name is Janelle Toman. I'm Director of Communications for the Board of Regents office in Pierre. I was asked, as a matter of our continuing conversation about diversity and inclusion, to work with various of our folks on the campuses who work daily and weekly on this topic in terms of how they support and deliver diversity services and programming across the campuses. One of the things that struck me as I was doing a little research before we put the presentation together is, why is this important? Well, the School of Mines' diversity report from this year, I think, said it pretty well, that the demographics in our country are changing, and universities nationwide increasingly mirror the rich diversity of all of these backgrounds. And I think we heard that yesterday in our conversation with the business community. And I think our presentation today is a nice segue from yesterday, where you heard about what the business community and business and industry are looking for in the people that we graduate and work with at our universities. And at this table are the people who help to make some of that happen through their work and their programming and their outreach. I will not spend much time because you want to hear from them and not me, but I did want to say that the work to create an inclusive and supportive campus environment doesn't operate in isolation. It's not about a diversity center or a certain diversity program. It really is infused throughout our system in a variety of ways. If you look at your system general education requirements that are in Board of Regents policy, we have several goals and requirements under Policy 2.7 that relate to diversity. We expect in our general education programming to have students who learn about and understand diversity through the study of social sciences and through the study of the arts and humanities. Additionally, and you'll hear more from the colleagues who are at the table here, student services have a wide variety of supports for a variety of students. And in addition to some that you may hear today, we serve students who are veterans, students who have disabilities, American Indian students, certainly our international student body, and increasingly the women in science who are underrepresented in some of our science and technology fields. And finally, diversity comes into play as our Higher Learning Commission, which is our regional crediting body for South Dakota higher ed. They look to see what kind of diversity services and support is available and offered on our campuses, so it is an accreditation issue as well. At the table today, and I am going to let each one of them introduce themselves when they begin their presentations, we have the 3 centers and offices that have specifically designated diversity programming and topics. I would say that all of our campuses are involved in this, but as you heard yesterday, they are delivered in different ways, and different campuses choose to address the diversity topic in different ways. Today, we are focusing primarily on the 3 universities that have specific designated diversity centers. We have asked them, so that their presentations are similar in content, to focus on 4 general topics, to talk about their mission and goals, the daily functions of their office and program, how they are structured, how they are staffed, and what kind of budget is attached to that. So, let me get out of this. Exit. And we'll go to, I think, School of Mines first. And so Jesse and Pat, please.
Good morning. I'm Pat Mann, the Vice President for Student Development and Dean of Students at the School of Mines. And we're really privileged to have the Center for Inclusion on our campus. And presenting today is Jesse Herrera, who is the director of the center.
Okay, good morning, everyone. As Dr. Mann mentioned, my name is Jesse Herrera, and I serve as the director for the Center for Inclusion. And I really can't start talking about the Center for Inclusion without first talking about the vision, mission, and values of the School of Mines. So as you can see there, our vision is to develop world-class leaders in science and engineering to benefit society. Our mission is to educate. You see those bolded words: educate, innovate, and engage. And then we value the integrity, ingenuity, inclusion, and impact. So SD Mines is educating scientists and engineers. Industry is looking for global-minded students. STEM fields have a great potential to work on projects in the global setting, as we heard yesterday as well. Inclusion has been identified by an SD Mines as an SD Mines core value. Inclusion, however, should not be mistaken to mean that discussions always end in agreement. Inclusion is being able to approach challenges by leveraging differences and commonalities to drive innovation and embrace true intellectual diversity. It is given that being involved in STEM requires hard work, dedication, and persistence. However, the idea of inclusion is not an obvious trait when discussed in STEM. Thus, it is an important element of this office. Again, it is driven by the industry demand of global scientists and engineers. The SD Mines Inclusion Statement was developed to bolster the university mission, and it reads, South Dakota School of Mines and Technology is committed to cultivating an inclusive learning environment where faculty, staff, and students can grow and succeed. We value the diversity of unique backgrounds, experiences, perspectives, and talents within our community. It is our goal to promote a culture of respect, honor, understanding, integrity, and collaboration. It is through this diversity and inclusion that we find our strength. Now, notice something about the statement itself is that we don't say we will be inclusive of this group or this group or this group. We were careful whenever you start listing groups or listing identities like that, all of a sudden your inclusive statement becomes exclusive. There's no way that you could possibly name every identity in that statement. So when we see prospective employees, prospective students, and they don't see themselves in that statement, then they might say, that might not be the school for us. So we asked campus what they viewed as traits to be a scientist and engineer, and you see them, or you saw them up there in the inclusion statement. The office name was recently changed to the Center for Inclusion to align with the campus strategic priorities and values. The mission of the center is to cultivate an inclusive campus climate that supports underrepresented populations, fosters respect for those with diverse backgrounds, and promotes cultural proficiency among faculty, staff, and students. We provide direction and services to prepare scientists and engineers for the global setting through recruitment, engagement, retention, graduation, and job placement. The Center for Inclusion advances student development specifically by fostering understanding of others whose backgrounds do not mirror their own. Underrepresented populations include, but are not limited to, ethnic minorities, first generation, low income, women, veterans, LGBTQ+. Any student that identifies with those identities would be welcome to come to the center and take part of our services. But one of the things that is not necessarily mentioned there is that although we have target students, anyone can come to the center to ask questions, to maybe they have a question that they're too afraid to ask or they're nervous about that. That's a perfect place to go and have a conversation about it. The center does not teach culture per se, but helps faculty, staff, and students confront their personal mindsets when faced with differences and commonalities. Activities are designed to enhance cultural awareness for all students, regardless of their background, and foster a climate of mutual respect for all. Overall, the center welcomes and encourages diverse opinions, thoughts, and ideas as we provide services to campus and the surrounding community. Daily functions are listed on the screen. But to highlight a few, the center assists several professional student groups in an advisory capacity. It is important to note that one does not need to personally identify by race, ethnicity with any group in order to join, hold officer positions, or attend national, regional, and leadership conferences. Advising also includes facilitating discussions and expressive activity outside of the classroom, like, for example, our NSBE, or our National Society of Black Engineers. They have collaborated with the Veterans Resource Center, Student Association Senate, and the Debate Club through open forums to discuss topics such as guns and proper ways to protest. The center is also instrumental as a campus resource. Insight, perspective, and experience can be called upon from the university president to athletic director to the department heads. Someone in this, through this office serves as myself, I serve as a co-chair for the Inclusion Committee, along with a representative from Human Resources. I'm a qualified administrator for the EQI 2.0 and the Intercultural Development Inventory. EQI 2.0 measures emotional intelligence, and the Intercultural Development Inventory, or IDI, measures cultural competence. This means that I can administer and interpret results from these assessments for use in professional development settings. The Diversity Report and American Indian Summary Report are used in grant writing and originate from this office as well. As no experience is the same, the purpose of the center is to drive collaborations across campus. In order to impact the greater campus culture, the center teams with human resources for faculty and staff trainings, as well as engaging the campus community with cultural competency awareness. Ultimately, the goal with students is to recruit, retain, graduate, and secure employment for them through involvement, which includes collaborations with the SLICE office, the Career and Professional Development Center, and the academic departments. It is important to point out that the Center for Inclusion is not the only area working with underrepresented students. Therefore, we collaborate with the Teoshbe program, which is a program for American Indian students, the Veterans Resource Center, Women in Science and Engineering, and the Ivanhoe International Center. Collaborations are essential for many reasons, including that we are a lean staff. Currently, the center is staffed by myself and an extremely capable student assistant. We rely upon the partnerships with leaders in the student organizations. We also share 8% of a shared administrative assistant position. We have an assistant director position, which is currently vacant in this fiscal year. The Center for Inclusion total budget is about $98,800. The main source of funds are tuition and fees. Shared administrative assistant works in SLICE, but handles some administrative duties such as purchasing and ordering. In summary, the Center for Inclusion collaborates with the campus community to provide direction and services to faculty, staff, and students in an increasingly global and interconnected society. This is driven by business and industry requesting more globally minded scientists and engineers. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse and Pat. Chair Bastian, would you wish us to hold questions till all the presentations, or?
I think if the regents have questions, they can certainly ask them at this point, but it might be better to hear all the presentations and then open it up for questions. But certainly if a regent had a question, we could entertain it at this time.
Actually, could you just expound a little bit? You mentioned assessment. Could you just explain just a little bit, kind of briefly, what assessment we're doing there?
Definitely. So there's two assessments that I'm a qualified administrator for. One is the emotional intelligence, EQI 2.0, and that is basically how well one knows oneself. So thinking about it in a professional setting is how well do you know your team, how well do you know, how well do you work with others. So there's an assessment that helps you from fields of empathy, self-regard. Yes.
Who is that administered to, or who takes that assessment?
It's open. It's so
It's a
sometimes
volunteer thing, or?
Volunteer thing. Sometimes I'm asked to come into a classroom and voluntarily administer those assessments to any student that would like. We have students that can sign up for sessions that can come to that. Nobody is required to take those assessments.
Okay. And then how is that used, and what's the benefit of that then? What comes out of that?
It's to the better you know oneself. So when we talk about interviewing with students and they go into interviews with industry, is that way they can even talk about that they're familiar with emotional intelligence. In industry, emotional intelligence is something that's being talked about more. And so it's something that they can say, I know I'm familiar with that. Here are some of my strengths. Here are some of my areas that I can improve on. But here's where I work well on a team as well. And so it gives you different readings on 15 different competencies.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, and I'm sorry, the IDI is the Intercultural Development Inventory, which measures one's cultural proficiency. So how well you work with those who have different background or experience than yourself. Same sort of thing, it's administered to anybody who would like to take it.
Faculty and staff take that as well.
Okay, thanks.
I'm trying to get an idea for what your committee on inclusion entails. So you're the co-chair. Could you give me, first of all, just tell me how often you meet, and then give me an example of what an agenda would look like?
Sure. So we meet about once a month, and our agenda is, right now, we're looking at messaging. Because we talk about inclusion, right? But what does it look like? I'm not talking about the philosophical piece of it. What does it look like? The mechanics of it. Every day. What is it? Because I think that is where people get a little bit lost is, well, I'm inclusive, but what does that mean? So that's what our agenda items look like in terms of messaging is how can we distribute or show these examples across campus on what it looks like every day. You know, having an open door policy or having certain messaging within the office to show that you're ready and willing to talk to whoever comes in. So that's the sort of thing that we talk about in inclusion.
Thank you, that helps. And then who's participating besides the co-chairs?
The co-chairs, the inclusion committee is made up of 4 faculty members, 4 employees, a student representative, and a campus affiliated member. So like campus ministries or foundation, something like that. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question since assessment came up, and I'd be interested later from all of you. If any of you have used the Project Implicit from Harvard, it's an amazing self-assessment, Project Implicit. It shows it, you do it by yourself because you want to know yourself better. And it's a series of pictures and a very short time to respond. It's amazing.
I'm familiar with the
Okay.
assessment, and it is great. It is great, and that's another agenda item for the inclusion committee is
Okay, yeah.
figuring out how to roll that out in a way that doesn't seem like you have to take this. So.
Yeah, we all maybe should do it too.
Well, good morning, Regents. I'm Michaela Willis. I'm the Vice President for Student Affairs at SDSU.
And I'm Cass Williams. I serve as the Chief Diversity Officer for SDSU.
So as we get started with our presentation, I thought it would be helpful to just talk a little bit about our mission, vision, and core values, and then we'll get into a couple of different things. But I think when we're talking about the purpose of our diversity office, it really is about serving our mission. And as a land-grant university, our mission is teaching, research, and outreach under an umbrella of access, and all to serve the state of South Dakota. And so as we talk about the purpose of our Office of Diversity, Inclusion, Equity, and Access, we'll definitely create some great tie-ins to that. Our vision is to be a premier land-grant university, and as part of that, it's really helping our students and our faculty and staff feel welcome on our campus. And our core values are being people-centered, creativity, diversity, excellence, and integrity. And so as we look at SDSU and our presentation today, I hope you'll keep those pieces in mind because it really does drive who we are and what we do at the university. So our diversity offices, wanted to give you a quick overview of what that looks like. And as I talk about this, I was reflecting overnight and this morning on some of the comments made yesterday by industry leaders. And one of the things that Nathan Sanderson said yesterday, and I'll kind of summarize in my own words, is that attending higher education alone helps create that inclusion that workforce is demanding and helps to broaden those minds of our students to prepare them for workforce. And so as he was saying that, I was really thinking about, it's kind of giving some weird feedback in there. Can you see that? There we go. 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 There we perhaps. Oh, here, we'll use the handheld. So, so technical difficulties, we just roll with it. So I was reflecting on that statement by Nathan Sanderson, and then reflecting on the different services and offices that we have at South Dakota State University. And without these services and without these offices, we wouldn't be able to create that welcoming environment that helps broaden our students' perspective and develop some of those critical thinking skills through the curriculum, through student organizations and activities, and just through those daily interactions. So I thought that was interesting to hear that from our industry leaders and reflect on how that really ties into this. So at South Dakota State University, we have several different functions. A couple of those reporting to the president. We, of course, have our Office of Diversity, Inclusion, Equity, Access, which we'll talk a little bit more about today. And we also have the WIKINI Initiative, which President Dunn brought forward as part of his inaugural address, and we've been working really hard on. In addition to that, some things that we won't be talking about or expanding on a little bit today, but important and critical services for our students particularly is our American Indian Student Center, our Office of Multicultural Affairs, and our Office of Veterans Affairs, as well as our Office of International Affairs. So there are a number of different ways that we serve the students at South Dakota State University. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Cass Williams to talk more specifically about our Office of Diversity, Inclusion, Equity, and Access.
Thank you. And I would just say even how we use this microphone this morning was a practice of inclusion. My learned colleagues next to us, and not competition, but friends, were able to share this microphone. So that's what inclusion means to me. But I'll go back and even say that SDSU is a land-granted institution. And so what does that mean? What does that look like? How do you create an environment of inclusion and access? When I walked into this room, and I guess as inclusion officers, we just kind of look around and say, does everyone has the ability or opportunity to maneuver through this room unassisted? Visually, are we prepared? Are we doing those things that are appropriate to make sure everyone is included in what we're doing? The mission of our office, we have it listed up there, but we have it divided out in terms of diversity, a practice of inclusion. One of the things we started doing at SDSU was just even doing a land acknowledgement and talking about this and who this land actually belongs to. That puts us in a space of inclusion. It doesn't take away from the program or the agenda, but it's a practice of inclusion. When we talk about the advancement of equity, I think, and when we start talking about who are the stakeholders at the table, and I tell the students and faculty and staff all the time, when we look at the table, if everybody isn't at the table, we need to make the table bigger. That's what equity and practice of inclusion looks like. Integration of access. For our office, and we'll talk about it later on, we created the ADA coordinator position because we need to look at access, especially if we're a land-granted institution. Does everyone has an access to an opportunity to education? We're committed to promoting diversity in every sector of SDSU and the Brookings community. I moved to Brookings about, and I tell people all the time, 4.5 winters ago. I don't say years anymore. I just say, been here 4.5 winters. But in that process, I've learned to appreciate the community that I'm in because I may be treated fairly on campus or I may have access to our buildings on campus, but when I go to the downtown area, am I treated that same way? Do I have access to every entryway that's in our downtown? So I became very involved in a lot of the committees in our town. Lead and facilitate development of institutional policies and protocols intended to create a more representative, equitable, and inclusive university. And I say this tongue in cheek, but just really just to be in the essence of things and where we are now, visually, let's just look at the room and let's look at who's at the table and who's at that table and who is behind us. Does equity present in this room? We have to ask that question. What would it feel like for a student if they're in a classroom and they see their professors in a wheelchair? What does that say to that student? We're providing that equitable access, and we're changing some of the stereotypes and myths that are out there. And I do appreciate you all giving us the opportunity to talk today because I do believe some people have tried to define or limit the work that we do, but when we talk about the work that we do, it is very expansive. And it does have an impact on our communities. And I'll go to the next slide before I get off script too much here. Our purpose, when I look at it in terms of what we're doing educationally, one of the programs that we do in the fall, we call it the Differences Dialogue. We purposely try and get students who have different opinions to come into the room together and commit to at least 4 to 6 weeks of talking about some of these difficult conversations. How do we do that in a dialogue and not a debate? So that's why we have the Difference Dialogue program. The Diverstiy Academy is something that we created about 2 years ago. It's about 8 workshops that we pulled together. Faculty, staff, and students attend this workshop. And the workshops that we present are based on information from our campus climate survey, and it gives us an indication on what we should be talking about and what that looks like. And I call these on-demand workshops for the campus and community. They're numerous. We get the calls, we get the emails. Please come out, speak with us, speak with our students, speak with our faculty, speak with some of our government agencies. What is it that you do? We want to know what it is that you do and help improve our different areas. Some of the service you'll see up there, just a few of the committees that we work on campus. I'm really excited about the food pantry because one of the things we looked at over time was some of the food insecurity issues that not just SDSU has, but nationwide, a lot of our students have food insecurity issues. So that's something that we looked into working on and doing. Next slide, just some of the outreach and committees that we serve on: the Brookings Human Rights Committee, the Brookings Area Transit Authority, for people with disabilities, economic, just so forth and so on. And I will say some of these, we didn't do this because someone asked us to do it. We did it because it needed to be done.
Okay, so as I was also reflecting on some of the industry comments and thinking about our office structure for the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, Equity, Access, we are not very different from what Regional Health presented yesterday with a diversity officer. We are not very different than what Daktronics is looking to do in hiring an inclusion officer to help them lead their organization and industry. And so as you look at our Office of Diversity, Inclusion, Equity, and Access, we have 2 positions. This office was formed in about 2008 as a result of some Higher Learning Commission accreditation recommendations and has been in place on our campus since that point in time. We do have our Chief of Diversity Officer, and then about a year ago, we hired our ADA coordinator to place some emphasis and campus-wide effort around ADA compliance. To give you a little bit more detail on these positions, you can kind of see the focus of our Chief Diversity Officer, Ms. Cass Williams, sitting right next to me, and we're delighted that she's on board in that particular role. But as we talk about our Chief Diversity Officer, it's really about creating that inclusive environment across our university. It's about working with faculty, staff, and students to make sure all are supported, all are welcome, but also to provide education, learning opportunities. That's our mission, is to educate. It's also about doing outreach into our community, as Cass shared some of the different outreach opportunities that she's had an opportunity to be a part of as part of this office. It's about getting out into the community and serving the community in ways that we need to. And it's also about supporting our research mission. And so as you look at the different components of what we do, it's about training, it's about compliance and ADA compliance, and how do we make our campus facilities more accessible? How do we make our classrooms more accessible? How do we make everything that we do accessible to all individuals? We serve on a variety of committees, but also leadership in inclusion initiatives around campus. And so there are a number of different roles that our Chief Diversity Officer plays. We also have that ADA coordinator, which again is a little bit of a newer position on our campus, focused on more campus-wide initiatives. And this program, of course, works with the Americans with Disabilities Act, Sections 503 and 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and other federal and state laws and regulations. But really, it's about making sure that our policies, procedures are in line so that we are accessible, doing reporting, but also making sure that if there are concerns that are raised on campus around accessibility, that we have that point person to go to. We also have a student disabilities officer within our Office of Multicultural Affairs that works with all of the accommodations within the classroom and primarily with students.
And I'll wrap up a little bit talking about our budget. I'm not great with numbers, so I'm glad there's folks on campus that know how to do those sorts of things. But I would also like to say that everybody in this room, I think our whole goal and interest is to get our students to the graduation stage. That's the outcome that we're all looking for. But what I do think that all of the diversity officers have in common is that we're looking for those obstacles that are in the way before they get to that stage. And this is the budget that our office does that on. So our total allocated funding is $210,000. And it's broken down as far as, salaries and benefits. So that's for 2 people that work within our office. But then when you look at our operating budget and what we're doing it on, I think we're doing a pretty good job because that's what we're working with to make these things happen. And I would even invite many of you all to come out to our campus and see what we're doing with the money that we have. You'll be impressed by some of the things that our students are saying and doing. And you'll probably notice, probably with all of us up here, we're not out there a lot. You don't see us a lot because a lot of our work is really in the background. It's about our students and putting them out there. So we do appreciate the opportunity again to come and speak with you all about the work that we do.
Thank you. Any questions by board members before we move on to USD? I have one. You talked about the accreditation. What included? The role and requirements of accreditation, you mentioned that in decisions as to your diversity office and efforts at diversity. Could you expand on that a little bit?
And I'll read directly from what they recommended for us. But one is to work on the lack of visibility and cohesion of diversity offices that we do have on our campus. Like Dr. Willis said, we have several offices that work on diversity efforts and missions, but who is that person bringing that together and making it more visible and be cohesive? The lack of implementation of assessment of diversity initiatives, a need for enhanced supportive services regarding our LGBT students, a need for updating course-by-course articulation memorandums of understanding, develop an American Indian Education Center, which we're very proud of because we're getting ready to open up one right in the center of campus, so I'm excited about that. And then I think the last and final point, and probably why we're here today, but a person hired to lead diversity initiatives needs to participate in the administrative council, meaning our executive team and our president's council.
And so the Higher Learning Commission is our regional accrediting agency, and that was their report in 2008, which was what led us to creating the Diversity, Inclusion, Equity, Access Office that exists today. It's been through a few morphs and changes in name and title, but that was when we did hire our first, essentially, Chief Diversity Officer.
And that was 11 years ago, and I presume that those requirements have not gone away.
That would be correct. We will have our self-study visit on November 4th and 5th, and they will be asking questions about how we promote diversity, inclusion, equity, and access on our campus.
Continuing from Regent Bastian's question, because not all of us might be aware, what are some consequences that might be faced by our institutions in not meeting these criteria?
So that's a great question. And as with the 2008 study, I know we had to do a few reports, interim reports to talk about how we were now meeting some of those criteria. But a loss of accreditation would be pretty extreme, and probably not likely initially, but they would ask us to make some changes and do some interim reports. If we didn't meet that expectation and for some reason were to lose accreditation, that means federal financial aid that all of our students benefit from. Over 90% of our students benefit from our federal financial aid programs. That goes away. And access to grants that we use for research goes away. And reputation and academic quality becomes a question. And so there are many impacts to not meeting those accreditation requirements. Now, there are also many ways we can meet those accreditation requirements, and so there's flexibility for the institution to determine how to meet those. But there are big impacts for not receiving accreditation.
And I'll just add real quickly to that, whoever wants to hear that they're not accredited. What student wants to go to a university that's not accredited or waiting on accreditation? When we're talking about enrollment and what enrollment looks like, add the stamp of not accredited to your university and see what that looks like. Do we want to take that risk or not? And I go back and I think about some of the institutions that did have the same conversation. I look at Tennessee, where they made that effort of removing their diversity office, and now they're back because the students demanded it. And I recall the conversation from yesterday when a young lady here at DSU said, we do not have a diversity office. And the one thing that I remember after she spoke was the dead silence in the room. It took a minute. Are we prepared to have those conversations with our students? Because if we're not out there doing it, they're going to ask for it and ask the why. And do we have a response for that?
Question? Would you mind just flipping back to the first page, the SDSU diversity offices? You talked about the diversity, inclusion, equity, access, but what about, like, the rest of these are listed? Because you've got American Indian Student Center, Multicultural Affairs, Veterans Affairs. Are those just functions, or is there staff and resources involved in that? I mean, I feel like we got a good overview of the one piece of it, but you've listed several other on this first page, and I want to get my arms around everything.
Okay, that's a very good question, Pam. Thank you for asking that. So there are other offices and other functions. We were asked for this presentation specifically to focus on our central diversity, inclusion, equity, access office, and so that is how we focused our presentation and our comments. However, under the student affairs area, we do have our Office of Multicultural Affairs that is staffed with 5 full-time individuals. We have a director, we have our student disability coordinator, we have our Latina student advisor, we have our African American student advisor, and we also have a secretary in that office. And so very fully functioning, but that is very student focused and student centered. We have our American Indian Student Center that is staffed with 4 full-time staff members. We just transitioned a 5th staff member into our admissions office for recruitment specifically. And so that serves a very specific purpose and has funding and budget associated with it.
Would you quickly go through those positions? Just
Oh, yes, certainly, certainly. So we have our director of the American Indian Student Center. We have our programming coordinator for American Indian Student Center. We have our retention and academic advisor for American Indian students. We have a secretary in that office. And then we have our American Indian Student Recruitment Coordinator, which just transitioned into our Office of Admissions, but formerly was housed within the American Indian Student Center. So those are the positions in there. We also have Veteran Affairs, which is staffed with 2 full-time positions. We have our Director of Veteran Affairs and our Veteran Affairs Coordinator, so 2 full-time positions and then some student staff within that. And then we also have our International Affairs Office, which is under our Vice President for Academic Affairs. And there is an Assistant Vice President for International Affairs. There is a Director for International Student Services. There is a Recruitment Coordinator, and I'm not going to probably get all of the organizational structure right, but they also do processing for all of the applications. And so I know there are a number of civil service employees and a few other professional staff positions within that area. So those are the offices that are listed up here, and each of them are very student focused and student services and student success focused.
And then how about just quickly Wakini?
Oh, yes, and our Wakini initiative, we have our full-time Wakini director, and then we recently hired an additional staff member through our Market Day Cargill grant. It's a 3-year grant-funded position to develop a culturally inclusive training and development program for faculty and staff at South Dakota State University. We're really excited about that. $1.2 million from the Margaret A. Cargill Foundation, and so we have a project coordinator for that grant.
Great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Michaela, you mentioned, I think, some of the professional advisors embedded in these, or we've talked a lot about, professional advising and the cost of that is another the subject. Is some of that within here, or is that all separate?
So actually this year is the first year that in our American Indian Student Center, our retention advisor position has transitioned to a retention and academic advisor. And so that individual will be providing the academic advising for all of our American Indian students starting this fall. We are working on making some transitions within our Office of Multicultural Affairs to do some similar type of work, but we've had some employee transition in there, and so we haven't fully made that transition as well. But right now, those are primarily retention and programming advisors in multicultural affairs and also in veteran affairs, but the American Indian Student Center has made a transition to academic advising as well, so professional advising.
A follow-up, would you just, I mean, I'm asking the right person, if anybody knows it, you will, but do you have any idea the number of American Indian students we have on campus at SDSU?
Oh, goodness.
I know,
So it
I know.
has
It's a
been,
cool
it has been
question.
growing, and I can tell you that in the past 2 years, our new students coming in have, and again, we're talking small numbers, but we've seen a growth of 20 new students coming in from 2 years ago, which is fantastic, and due to a lot of intentional effort. But there are probably, depending on how you define it, around 250-ish, and we use a pretty broad definition.
Yeah.
There's 3 different ways we define American
Right.
students: IPEDS, border regions, and then the most inclusive, which we use.
Okay, thank you very much.
USD, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Board of Regents, and thank you for the opportunity to share diversity and inclusion programming and support services at USD, which we are very proud of, and it's making a big difference for our students, our faculty, and our staff. I'm Kim Grieve. I serve as the Vice President and Dean of Students at the university. We were asked specifically to focus on the Office of Diversity, but like the 2 other presentations before, we have many diversity initiatives through student services on campus, which I'll briefly describe and create a sense of community for all of our students. Student Services is committed to furthering the institutional values of diversity and inclusiveness by welcoming and supporting all individuals and identities. The office is primarily responsible for leading diversity efforts on campus include the Center for Diversity and Community, which we opened proudly 5 years ago. It provides student-led activities and programming and is open as a safe space to all students on campus. There are 2 full-time employees in the Center for Diversity and Community. The Center for Diversity and Community offers educational programming and initiatives, student engagement, and lifelong learning. It supports diverse student organizations by promoting multicultural leadership development, and it fosters cross-cultural collaboration between majority and minority student populations. The second office is our Native Student Services Office, which houses 1 full-time person, the director, and it serves faculty, staff, and students as a cultural resource through collaboration with departments and programs across campus, and provides culturally responsive advising to the Native American Cultural Center. The cultural and social programming, as well as the academic workshops, are open to all students. The third office is our Student Veterans Resource Center, which has 1 full-time person and provides support to our veterans, current military spouses, and their dependents. The fourth office is Disability Services, which has 2 full-time employees as well as a secretary, and that office provides students and campus visitors with disabilities full and equal access to all programs and activities USD offers. And finally, we have federally funded grants through the U.S. Department of Education to provide increased access and success in college for university and K-12 students through the TRIO Student Support Services Program, which has 3 staff, the TRIO Upward Bound Program, 2 staff, the TRIO Education Talent Search Program, which has 6 staff and serves students across the state of South Dakota, K-12. To qualify for these programs, students must be low income, first generation, or have a disability. I'd like to thank you for the time and attention. This work continues to be important for student recruitment and retention, as well as preparing our students to lead in the 21st century. I will now turn it over to Lamont Sellers, who will present the Office of Diversity, which is the focus of our conversation today. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity, and I'm excited about it. My name is Lamont Sellers. I'm Associate Vice President for Diversity at USD. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm Black, cisgendered, male, middle class, first generation college educated, married, come from a holiness Pentecostal background, born and raised in Hampton, Virginia, and come from a two-parent stable home with my upbringing. This is but a small piece of who I am as an individual and all of the facets of diversity that make up who we are as individuals. Diversity really is all of those facets that make up who we are and those things that we look to engage on our campus. I'm an educator and a lifelong learner and continue to do my part to help USD realize its vision and values. Our vision is to be the best small public flagship university in the nation built on a liberal arts foundation. Our values, USD is committed to becoming a regional leader in diversity and inclusiveness initiatives and the practice of inclusive excellence. This concept of inclusive excellence is a strategic organizing principle that comes from the work of the American Association of Colleges and Universities, AAC&U. And inclusive excellence really does give us a broad definition of diversity that includes many of these facets that I talked about before. And additionally, this concept also moves us from a myopic view of one central office paying attention to all the diversity and inclusiveness needs of the campus to truly deputizing every faculty, staff, and student at our institution to work towards providing an open, welcoming, and inclusive environment so that we can all thrive and be successful. Finally, inclusive excellence calls for us to work to embed equity and inclusion into the very fabric of who we are as an institution. The question that we're here to answer is not a new one and is asked and answered several times over as USD's Office for Diversity works to provide USD the advice, support, and expertise related to inclusive excellence to achieve institutional and personal success of all faculty, staff, and students. In order to achieve excellence as an institution, we must be inclusive through active engagement of all constituencies, including but not limited to personal and social identities, ideologies, perspectives, and backgrounds. The work of equity and inclusion, or in USD's case, inclusive excellence, is accomplished by many across the campus. The central office that assists in these efforts is staffed by two people, myself as the Associate Vice President for Diversity and a graduate assistant working 10 to 20 hours per week. Reporting to the president, I'm on the university's executive council along with the vice presidents and other presidential direct reports. While the Office for Diversity is the university-wide office that coordinates diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts more broadly and works with faculty, staff, and students, our Center for Diversity and Community really is the student-facing center that focuses on providing the needs of our student populations, as Dr. Grieve has discussed. As we focus particularly on the Office for Diversity, you can conceptualize my daily functions into basically three buckets, if you will. And these things come out of my job description as well as the emerging needs of our campus, being advising, support, and expertise. The advice that I have and continue to provide to various groups and others across campus related to diversity, equity, and inclusion are highlighted by the things that we do with these various councils and groups across campus. So you see, I sit on the Executive Council, the Provost Council, Dean's Council, Student Services Senior Staff. I'm currently chairing the President's Council on Diversity and Inclusiveness, working with each one of the colleges and schools, our functional areas, as well as community partnerships. I'm glad to say that as a part of this advising role and being a part of these things, our of course, we were knocked twice on our accreditation review for diversity efforts, but am glad to say that just recently we were able to find out that through the HLC Quality Initiative that we have made great strides to improving those things across our campus. When we talk about support, the Office for Diversity supports our students, faculty, and staff through a number of programmatic efforts, and you'll see those listed there. Additionally, there are requests that come to our office. I like how Cass put it, these on-demand requests that ask for support and assistance in various ways. For example, I continue to support the University Center, now known as the USD Community College for Sioux Falls, and the growing diverse populations attending classes there. Faculty are looking for ways to better handle language barriers and engage students from various backgrounds in the classroom. I have been called on by Human Resources to assist in supporting them with search committees and helping to think through diversifying candidate pools, not just for people of color, but also looking at veterans or persons with disabilities. Our Student Government Association has called on our office to assist with training and support to help them in creating inclusive teams and managing team dynamics. Partnerships continue to emerge and are strengthened as we work together across the campus to address the needs that arise, and these are but a few of the requests that come in on a regular basis. When we start to think about the expertise that the Office for Diversity gives to the campus and those that are involved, we have grant consultations that take place, and I sit on the steering committees for a couple of these, being the HHMI Inclusive Science Initiative, as well as the iCare grant that comes out of the Office for Violence Against Women, accreditation consultations and talking about Higher Learning Commission, and there are no less than 20 other program level accreditations that I've also assisted with across the campus. There's research and data collection that's going on a continual basis and helping to think through things, not just with our campus, specifically with institutional research, but also helping our faculty think through as they're doing research and thinking through the questions that they're asking in surveys and ways in which they collect that data. I've also provided testimony for the South Dakota U.S. Commission on Civil Rights and also served as vice chair of Vermilion's Human Relations Commission. When we look at the budget of our Office for Diversity, we see here that from general funds, a little over $12,000 comes from general funds, representing about 7.3% of the total funds that come from general funds, and then other funds, mainly being tuition, just right at $161,000. Again, that's going towards myself, the salary for the Associate Vice President, a graduate assistant, and then operating expenses, including programming, professional development, travel, and office supplies. Thank you very much.
Questions?
I have some questions. I really appreciate what you do, and I know this year and last year there are unique challenges in our state. The spotlight is on you, and now is the opportunity for you to just tell us your story and help us dispel any myths, because we know you're being looked at carefully, and we all need to understand better the services you provide. So if any of you have any story about what you do and why you do it, I'd like to hear it.
Well, I'll dive in first since I already have the microphone. The work that I've been doing this work for the better part of 20 years now, and this is my life's blood. I mean, I live it, I breathe it, it just is a part of me. Like I said, I'm an educator. I started off in the classroom as a high school math teacher and started doing diversity training in Northern Virginia, Prince William County schools. And from then until this point, have traveled the country and have and worked with a great number of individuals, groups, and universities on these various things. But the work that I do truly does come from that I have a deep love and respect for humankind. That is where it all lies. And I believe that we can all be better and do better at the things that we're doing, and I want to make sure that we're all able to succeed on our campuses. I don't have one of those hard bootstrap stories to share or anything like that. I have quite a few privileged areas in my life and background. But with that privilege, I feel the responsibility to help those that don't have that same access, that don't have those same things ahead of them, and help to remove those barriers and obstacles that may stand in their way.
You don't want to tell your story, Dr. Willis?
I will in a second. I'll let you go first.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to tell my story. I will be brief because I know it's brunch time. Okay. I'll be brief. I'm originally from Louisiana, but I went to Pennsylvania for a little while and worked there, and now I'm here in South Dakota. The one thing I do miss, and no discredit to anyone here, is the food. We need to work on some seasoning here in South Dakota.
Diversity of seasoning.
But I tell the students on campus, I've learned about hot dish. Please don't do that to a tater tot again. But on my way from Louisiana through Pennsylvania to here, it's been an interesting dynamic. And I tell people in the South, and no disrespect to my friends in the South and my colleagues in the South, the work that we do is needed here.
Bingo.
Our students, a lot of our students have not been exposed, and I don't give that as an excuse or a way out, but they just not have been exposed to many differences. So the work that we do is really needed here. This is why we're in the role that we're in. And I remember I got a question one time before, where do you see yourself in a few more years? And, you know, life, career, and people jumping around and all those ambitious things that students want to do. How can I get a job? This is a calling. This is what we do. This is our work. And I'll just tell a quick story, not my story, but another student story, and I won't share much about it because we're working through it. But we have a student here from another state, African-American student here, got their financial aid loans and all that type of stuff, and they did what they're supposed to do with it. They bought books. They bought the things that they need, but the student doesn't have any shoes.
Yeah.
Literally do not have any shoes. Now, I'm not looking to send them to the Multicultural Center to join an organization. They don't need tutoring. They need shoes. So when we think about what our office does, we see those blind spots that are on campus. And if this student doesn't have the shoes, how many other students don't have the things that they need? We have a lot of international students coming to South Dakota with a windbreaker on. No, you need a coat. Not one from, I don't want to say branding store names, but you need a thick coat in this weather. It changes, and it changes quickly. So when you ask what is our story are many people's stories. And people have asked me, and I won't share my other colleagues' concerns or comments, but people are saying, Cass, why don't you leave in the middle of this conversation? I said, I can't. The work needs to be done. We have a story to tell, not me. Everyone in this room has a story to tell. I'm not sure how it's going to end or when it's going to end, but we have work to do because we have so many students wanting to come to our institutions. Our diverse student populations are the ones that are strongest on our campus right now. Our Latino student population is our fastest growing population. The students that are graduating the most on our campuses are our international students on our campus. The work is needed here, so that's why we're here. And my best meetings are the ones that are unscheduled. When that faculty or staff person are at their wits' end and they're done, before they head to HR, before they head to the president's office, they look for me. And they want to talk about the experiences that they had and what happened and why they want to leave. And I do my best to keep them here, but I also keep that data. Because if you're that person that's having that experience, someone else is having that experience. And I'll tell you a real shocking, interesting story is that we have more white students in our Black Student Alliance than we do Black students. They want that cultural exchange. They want to know. A lot of our students graduated from schools of 50 to 70 to whatever, so they don't have that exposure. So what they know is what they see on television. But when they meet a student from Dubai, when they meet a student from another country, that's an exchange that they both can have. And that's what we're here for, to facilitate that conversation and to close the gaps where we don't see. And I appreciate the business people coming here yesterday because we have to blur the lines between workforce and higher education. That's the gateway. And we have a responsibility. And get some seasoning in Brookings.
Get some seasoning.
Thank you. So
Louisiana.
I'm a first-generation American, first-generation college student. Both of my parents are from Mexico. My dad made it to the 3rd grade. They still practice corporal punishment in Mexico. I don't know what he was doing one day, but he must have been doing something, but the teacher beat him so bad, his friend literally had to drag him home. He's like, why am I going to go to school? I'm just going to get in trouble. So he went off and did other things. My mom made it to 6th grade. My grandmother died when she was, when my mom was 13, giving birth to my youngest uncle. And so my mom kind of took on that parent role. And so the fact that I could be here right now and sitting in front of you from that beginning, and I get a little teared up talking about my parents, is that they sacrificed so much for me to be here and to have this education that I received. As I mentioned, first-generation college student, first in my family to receive a master's degree. I've been given this gift, and I know I'm not the only one with that sort of background. Unfortunately, that's pretty common in a lot of the students that we might work with. When I had a privilege of working as a Peace Corps volunteer, I served in the country of South Africa for 2 years. And I would literally go out under a tree. I'm not exaggerating. I'd go out under a tree. There were no supplies in some cases, and I would draw in the dirt. I would do lessons in the dirt. I wasn't a teacher, but I would be co-teaching, or I would see other teachers doing this. And I thought to myself, I'm doing this here. Well, what would happen if I had just had a little something, a little resources, or a little bit of support in that way? And I think all of us do a lot with a little. And one of the myths I know that I want to dispel is the idea that we have these, multi-million-dollar budgets. That's not the case. I think we do a lot with a little. We collaborate. It's not only because we like the collaboration, and that's very fulfilling and integrates campus, but it's also a necessity. We have to do a lot with what we have. So coming back to the United States, I'm like, well, why can't I do all this? If I was literally drawing pictures in the dirt, why can't I do this with the computer? Or why can't I help with students when they come in and ask these questions? When I meet with a family and both parents speak Spanish, and I start talking to them in Spanish, hola, ¿cómo estás? ¿Cómo va tu estudiante? The tension just melts away. Find someone that can understand me, and they start talking to me more than the parent. And I get it. I was like that. With my parents, I would go to the dentist or the doctor, and I would be translating in my broken Spanish, broken English at that point, an 8-year-old self. I'm just happy nothing ever major happened, because that would have been heavy news. In some cases, that has happened with some of our students. So kind of getting back to what Lamont said is, so we've been given this gift of this power, right? So I almost think it's not only a good idea to use this gift, but it's kind of our responsibility to do that as well.
Other questions, other comments?
I can briefly share my story as well. I did grow up in privilege. My parents were both educated, but my dad was a professor at Mississippi State College for Women, and my mother started the first Head Start programs in Columbus, Mississippi. And through that, what my parents always taught me was, with education, we can change the world, and that everybody deserves a right to education, and with just some resources, everybody can succeed. And so that's been my life's work through TRIO programs, serving low-income first generations and students with disabilities, and watching them succeed over the last 25 years. So education is very important, and so are the resources, so that everybody has a chance to succeed.
So I have one question, and for the regents and then also for the audience. How many in this room are first-generation college students? There's a lot of us in this room. And so as I think about my experience, it comes from being that first-generation college student. It comes from a mother that would have been an amazing teacher, and our youth, they lost out when my mom wasn't able to go to college because it wasn't expected and she didn't have the resources to attend college. And now they are gaining because she's a librarian in her local small community, and boy, it doesn't feel like going to work for her every day. But that is my role model. That is who I grew up with. Education, I came from a place of privilege now, middle income family, first generation college student, but there was an expectation that I went to college. But I'm the first in my family to have received a doctorate. That was a big deal in my family. And so I think about Dakota's Promise and the work that we're doing around access in this state. And my work in higher education has been at an open enrollment institution that enrolled students with a 14 on the ACT. I believe in access, and our students deserve the opportunity to have access to higher education, just like I had access to higher education as a first-generation college student. We were talking about this in Students Association just on Monday night, and I got on my little bit of a soapbox, and I said, why can we not see that every student that wants access to higher education should be able to have that access? That's what Dakota's Promise is all about. It's about access and helping students be successful. It's about student success. You know, I was a vice president at age 30 as a young woman. That came with its own set of challenges. And so youth and being female in a leadership role in what has historically been a very white male world. And so first generation, female, young, and the obstacles that put in my way and in my place. But you know what? It was opportunities I was given, so why can't we give opportunities to more students to have access to higher education? So that is really why I believe in Dakota's Promise, why I do the work that I do. It's about access. It's about giving opportunity. I've had many opportunities in my life and have come from a place of privilege in many, many ways. But this is why we do the work we do. It's about opportunity, and it's about creating that workforce and creating that future that we all want to see in South Dakota. So, thank you.
And I would just like to share with you an example of work on a campus through multicultural affairs. And Jesse is an excellent facilitator. And an example is our National Society of Black Engineering Students hold controversial conversation forums. And Jesse facilitates those. And they go and they don't want to just talk to the choir and hear what each other think and agree with each other. They go and find another group on campus who they're going to come at different views. And so one example is they went to the veterans students and they wanted to talk about the gun legislation that was going through the House, through the local legislative system. And we had some students come in who were from rural backgrounds who grew up using guns, very familiar, very comfortable, feeling like carrying those weapons is just fine and that's their right and privilege. And then students, and particularly a young woman whose family is from inner city, and where there are unfortunate shootings of young black men, sometimes randomly, that sort of thing. And so they shared their different points of view, and the young woman said, every day I worry when my brother leaves the house that he might not come home. And so they didn't come in agreeing, they didn't necessarily leave agreeing, but they all left with different ways of thinking and better understanding.
Great example. I have another question to you. Didn't I read somewhere in here that as part of the services you provide, you loan out books? You have a loan library?
Sure, we have a book loan program. Years ago, we were fortunate enough to have access to the College Access Challenge Grant, and through that, we were able to build up a library.
Okay,
and
great.
so it's simple. If a student cannot afford to go to the bookstore to buy books, or it's a hardship, they come into our office, and if we have it, we loan it out to them.
May I please give you some books?
Please.
I have a ton of books right up your alley that I've read. They're up to date. I don't need them.
Awesome, thank
I'll give them to you. Bring the box over.
I hesitate to try to bring this to a close,
Yeah.
but I'm looking at my watch.
Oh.
And if there's any other questions or comments by the regents, we'll certainly entertain that.
There were two questions that I did want to ask, and hopefully they won't take too much time, but I think it'd probably be important to address. First of all, I have the distinction, obviously, of being the regent with my boots on the ground, so to speak, at a university campus every day. And as the USD people know, probably, I worked in the office of the Dean of Students for a few years, which was right down the hall from our Center for Diversity and Community at USD. And just by being a student, I feel like I'm pretty familiar with the sort of opportunities and programming that are provided through our diversity centers. But I wanted to kind of ask a few things just kind of for the benefit of this group. Would I be accurate in kind of my understanding that a good majority of the programming and events and speakers that come to campus are invited and organized by individual student organizations? And from there, where do these organizations get their funding from, and what is sort of the role of advising and guidance from the diversity offices and centers for those student groups? Kind of a lot there, but hopefully that's...
Okay, I'll go first. I'm trying to answer briefly here. Yes, the programs, the offerings that are offered by the center specifically are more the professional development. We talked about the assessments. You can come to those things and get a better understanding of yourself. So those usually not inviting too many guest speakers. The student organizations, they get their funding through the student organization allocation process, or they ask for corporate sponsors as well. So with School of Mines, we have a lot of industry partners, and that's where they ask for their funding. That's how they get some of the funding to bring in some of these speakers that they would bring in.
I just want to also say, though, our faculty bring in a tremendous amount of speakers, and they're bringing them into the classroom. And so it's all across the board where the speakers are coming from.
And I would ditto the same thing everybody's saying.
Yeah, at USD, our student organizations do plan the events, and they are funded through the GAF process.
Okay, thank you. And finally, I do want to address this topic too. Could you just kind of illuminate for us a little bit more how you incorporate the notion of intellectual diversity, a concept I think when you truly examine does really represent a central tenet of the university experience. How does this concept factor into the work of our diversity offices and programming, and might there be opportunities to possibly look at new ways of addressing or expanding the way that we engage in that topic? Just how do you see your role in addressing intellectual diversity as it relates to overall diversity efforts?
So one of the things that, let me start with the last part of it. There are ways that we can incorporate and do a better job of embedding intellectual diversity into the things that we're doing, programming, those types of things. I believe that it's a misnomer or myth that we have been averse to intellectual diversity or anything that is perceived as offensive or rubs people the wrong way or anything like that. And we are very much wanting to bring various voices to the table to talk about any number of issues. So I believe all of our campuses have intergroup dialogue programs in some way, shape, or form, are sponsoring and hosting these conversations. But one of the things coming from the East Coast and coming to South Dakota and recognizing South Dakota is a quiet place. I have not seen the robust fervor of argument here in South Dakota that I would see back east at UVA, Virginia Tech, UNC Chapel Hill. I have not seen that here. And everybody is so nice that, oftentimes those that have differing opinions choose not to share for whatever reasons. So it does become difficult for us, but I'm still looking for ways to engage those voices in those conversations as they arise.
And I would say college campuses are those places where you do have those exchange of ideas. That's why they're there. We're here to facilitate those kinds of conversations. And on the presentation, I spoke briefly about our differences dialogue. It starts off, the difference is dialogue. And again, a lot of times we get a lot of like-minded people in the room and they're all patting each other on the back. And they say, you're singing to the choir. I said, well, sing louder, because we need more people in this room. So this year we decided to incorporate and have co-sponsorships with our college Democrats and our college Republicans. We want people in the room to have those conversations. And I'm really excited about it because we're coming on an election cycle. I want to see how the students process that conversation. I'm there to learn. And I would say even years ago, back on college campuses, they had teach-in sessions where they did these types of things. When it was time for the draft, these are the things they talked about. When they talked about sit-ins and movements like that, these are the places where those things occurred. These are where a lot of our leaders became leaders. So no, I'm not afraid of the conversation about intellectual diversity. I'm interested in the conversation. Where are our next leaders? When are they going to stand up and say, I'm here, I'm ready to work? It is not our job to tell students what to do. Our job is to listen to our students. We're preparing them for the workforce, and we're preparing them to be our next leaders, you know. I tell students sometimes, especially during MLK Day, I say, I'm not marching like Dr. King did. I'm getting a little old. I can give you a block and a half, and I'm done, right? But we have students that can run marathons. Let them do that. That's their space to do that. We want to have those interchanging ideas. We support that. And again, I think I agree with Lamont in saying that there's this picture that's been put out about what it is that we do. Let's talk about the things that we're already doing. Let's highlight some of those efforts.
Sure. Yeah, I'll be very brief. I really agree wholeheartedly with Lamont and Cass, and in some cases, I thought we were doing it already. I thought we were already having that exchange of ideas. I thought we were already, through the work that we were doing, inviting those different conversations to come in. One of the big points that I tell my students is, to be careful or mindful that you are allowed, you have the freedom to say whatever you want to say, but sometimes people don't want to listen to what you say. People don't want to engage you with that conversation. And so really trying to help our students work through that they have that freedom, but people will not always want to engage them.
Thank you, all of you. Your direct audience has been the regents, but I think in a broader sense, it's not only everybody in this room, but everybody that wants to listen online. I hope a lot of people are. I know that yesterday's presentation by business leaders and today's presentation by all of you certainly has helped the board understand this issue. I know that when I walked in today and yesterday, I knew that diversity and inclusion and equality are core issues for us and our institutions. I've got a deeper understanding of that now through all of your participation. So thank you all very much. I wish we had another hour. I think it would be informative and appreciated, but we have to move on, and I really appreciate your participation. Thank you.